trying to make it. You know, what I learned, photography is a hobby. And I learned if you tilt the lens a certain way, the lines, the vertical lines behind you will align in a pretty much straight up vertical manner, or about 180 manner. And I'm trying to get that right now. So yeah, we're pretty close to it.
Is my vertical on my end working out?
Oh, you're in there. You're absolutely perfect. No, you look good. And thanks for dressing up in sweats. God bless you.
Well, I got my Blues. I'm going St. Louis.
Oh, is that? Yeah, that, you know, I forget that. I'm not much of a hockey fan.
No apologies necessary.
No, I did go to one Golden Knights game, and I want to tell you, I was blown away at what kind of show they put on. The closed arena, there was never a moment of silence, and the electricity with that crowd was one of the damnedest things I have ever witnessed. I thought I'd seen it at baseball games, but no, nothing like an enclosed arena of 18,000. And it's constantly bumping, thumping, and loud.
For those that don't know, you've been in Vegas for about, 27 years, you told me?
Yeah, we're going on 27 years.
And we are obviously enjoying it.
You know, when I came out here originally, that was in 1994. I was working for ESPN, and they had told me this. I was on a new contract. I had done 3 years with them, and they had mentioned they would like for me to do regional games. And with Arizona and Colorado coming into the league, I said, yeah, that sounds pretty good. We were in Los Angeles and ready to sell our home. And I said, let's take a look at Las Vegas. And we were surprised when we came out here that it looks just like Los Angeles in a lot of areas, except there are places to play all the games, the video games, the gambling games, even in supermarkets and drugstores. Once we got past that, we said, you know what, this is a pretty nice place to live. So we've been here 27 years, all that time thinking that there would be a major league job for a major league ball club. But, well, that train's left the station.
You know, for folks I have friendships with that live in Vegas, they love the fact that there's always a show. There's always an artist in town, a band playing, a play. You can do anything, any night.
You know, you're right about that. I've gone to a couple of concerts, and they're the most casual things that you can imagine, because for some of the bigger known groups of, well, the 60s and 70s, the ones I followed back when I was in high school, they still tour. They don't have all the original members, but they play the songs, and in some cases they sound a lot better than what they did when they were originally recorded. So we went to a few shows where we saw some of those performers. Probably the best show I saw was Johnny Rivers. And was a Johnny Rivers fan back in the 60s, followed him through the 70s, through all of his changes. And then when I saw that he was appearing out here, we went to see him in an outdoor facility, and you could walk around, you could walk up to a place and buy a beer or whatever you wanted to do. Even if you wanted to place a bet at the casino, you could do it, all while watching the performer. And it was the original performer with an even bigger and better band. I know that's hard to believe, but the recording sessions back in the 60s, those were done in bits and pieces with some of the great studio musicians of the time. But now these musicians travel and they do shows on a regular basis. So the product that comes with them is in some cases superior to what the original was.
In the late 80s, I was covering a Missouri Tiger basketball game, and we caught blood, sweat, and tears at Caesar's Palace.
Isn't that something?
It was great.
Was it the original group?
Yeah. Well, the lead singer was, I don't know about the band, but the original singer was the original guy.
David Clayton Thomas, was that him? Yeah, that would be him. Yeah, if you got David Clayton Thomas, you had a treat. So
Vegas, just like Overland, Missouri.
Yeah, there's some similarities. Not many, but there are some.
They both have water.
You could breathe relatively clean air. The people that we found here in Las Vegas, just as nice as the people that you find in Overland, at least back in the days that I lived there. I visit every so often, every couple of years when there's an occasion to come in. I'll go in and have a chance to say hi to old friends, visit some places that still exist. Now, you don't get that here. In Las Vegas, if a place is more than 10 or 12 years old, it's either being renovated or torn down with something new, bigger and better being built. With Overland, well, you still have some buildings that are well over 100 years old. A lot of homes are over 100 years old in the Overland area.
Do you hit Wolfie's when you come back?
No, Wolfie's was never a stopover. No, don't do Chuck-a-Burger, Steak and Shake, those places. It's not that I don't like it. It's just that at 70 years old, my digestive system says, you know what, we might reconsider this.
70 years old, you're looking great. Do you get your shot yet?
I got both of them. I couldn't believe this. My wife and I get up in the morning early, 6, 7 o'clock, watch the morning news, catch up with everything, and then retire to my office upstairs where I'm sitting right now. And what I do is I start reading, checking out emails, probably like everybody else. We got an email from Walgreens, a local Walgreens, saying that we have COVID shots available, but you have to make an appointment. So I said, let's give it a shot. So to speak.
No pun
so
intended.
I went ahead, signed up, and got my wife signed up on consecutive appointments. And we went in and virtually no waiting, got our shots, came back 3 weeks later and repeated the process. So we consider ourselves two of the most lucky people on the face of the earth for receiving our COVID shots in the manner that we did.
For folks I know who have gotten the shots, maybe one day out of commission on the arm, but other than that, no big deal?
The first shot was as easy as can be for both of us. The second one, well, that took a little bit out of us. In fact, our method of operation now, with both of us being in our 70s, is if there's something that keeps us down for what used to be a couple of hours, now we give it a day, and then we give it up a follow-up day after that, because we're at the point we have a lot of time to do whatever it is we want to do. We just want to make sure that when we do it, we enjoy it to its fullest. So we took a day with that second shot because both of us were feeling a bit under the weather. But that second day, we were rip-raring to go and continued on our normal schedule of things.
So if you wouldn't mind, here on the podcast, we document important people, places, and events in St. Louis's past and present. You are absolutely part of that category. Overland, what, 66, 67 state champions. What do you remember about those days?
Wow, boy, those were some fun days. I just didn't realize that some 53, 54 years later that I would still be thinking about them. In fact, probably even more so now than I did over the preceding years, simply because I've become closer through the internet and through some of the visits with some of the people that were on those teams. Hold 1 second. This is live podcasting. We cough. So we have visited, and it's become increasingly important for all of us when we have a chance to talk about those days to visit. And then because the memories have slipped in some cases, there's always somebody around to supply the information that has disappeared from our memories. So it's a lively conversation, and it brings back a lot of good memories. You get a nice warm and fuzzy about it when I think about it, even though back in those days, 16, 17, and 18, I was wondering what the world was like, particularly on the West Coast where they had water, they had surfing, and just about everything else that was made up to be the California dream. Fortunately, I got to live that California dream playing for the Dodgers. So it was something that I had hoped that I could do. I didn't know how it was going to happen. And when I look at the way things transpired over the last 50 or so years, I'm just kind of surprised at the way that things have happened, going here, then there, going here, then there, and ultimately leading back to a lot of conversation with people where it started. That's back in St. Louis, particularly Overland.
And where it started, can you tell me who was Alfred Hellwig?
Alfred Hellwig, there are a couple of them. There are three Alfred Hellwigs that I know of. First of all, my grandfather, who immigrated from Germany well over 100 years ago, and he did it with his brother. His brother went to Colorado, wanted to become a gold miner. He eventually did that, but my grandfather stayed in St. Louis, the South St. Louis area, and worked as a plumber for a number of years. The second Alfred Hellwig was his son and my uncle. The third Alfred Hellwig is my cousin, and he now lives comfortably in a rather warm Fort Myers, Florida.
So he's not in Vegas, but he's enjoying the same kind of scenery.
No, well, you mean from Florida?
Yeah.
Palm trees, maybe some of the same kind of plants, but Florida has a lot of humidity, particularly in the summer. Here, it's just plain hot. In fact, when the wind blows, I've always joked when I've done ball games about playing a game in a hairdryer, because the winds sometimes shoot out at 25, 30 miles an hour, and the flags look like they've been starched in place. So you have that desert kind of landscape and lifestyle, and place that up against the hot, humid that you're going to get in Florida. Benefits to both, particularly this time of year.
So you go to high school in Overland, you get drafted by the Cardinals. Do you remember the call when they called to tell you?
You know, I didn't get the call from the Cardinals. I was working that day. In fact, what I've tried to do is chronologically go back and remember where I was in those days of late May and early June of 1967. Of course, there was the state championship baseball team. We ended that in the latter part of May on one weekend. And then it was time for high school graduation. But also mixed in there was the amateur free agent draft. And to the best that I can find, it occurred on June 6th. I had a tryout with the Atlanta Braves on June 1st down at, Busch Stadium 2. So I'm piecing those different days together, but I also held a job not knowing exactly what was going to happen with my immediate future. I had already signed a letter of intent to attend Southern Illinois University on a combined baseball and basketball scholarship, and was all set to attend once the fall began. But baseball came calling on the draft on June 6th. I was selected second by the Cardinals. It was my mother who gave me a call while I was working at Boyd's. Do you remember Boyd's?
Oh, absolutely.
I was working at Boyd's in Northwest Plaza, selling men's shirts, socks, underwear, all that, except for suits. So that's when I got the call. So I was a little bit surprised it was the Cardinals, because they had not been out front about their interest in me. They were more or less in the background, but they were watching, and they decided to draft me second. So, you know, for me, that was I guess, a benefit of unintended consequences, because with that draft, it set into motion my baseball career, which spanned over 22 different seasons. And a lot of it I didn't plan. A lot of it just happened, and I reacted to it. But life gets in the way. And in this particular case,
of somebody who was an agent.
What's that?
In high school, didn't you play with a son whose dad was an agent or a scout?
You're talking about George Sylvie. Jim Sylvie was the name of the teammate. Yeah, he was on the state championship team with us. And his dad was, I think, the farm director or head of scouting for the Cardinals. And they lived not more than a mile from where I grew up. So there was a familiarity, although in passing, prior to being drafted by the Cardinals, I just said hi, maybe here and there. Excuse me.
No, not at all. So once you're drafted by the Cardinals, you're kind of on the fast track. Did I read right, Jerry, that your AAA manager was Warren Spahn?
That's right.
That's crazy.
When Warren retired as an active player, he had a number of offers to be a major league pitching coach, but opted to manage in the minor leagues because, he didn't believe that he could fulfill himself totally as a pitching coach. He wanted to manage. And I can understand that, because a lot of guys want the control and they want to be in control of the whole game. So he opted to do it and train as a minor league manager in the Cardinals organization. He chose Tulsa because it was close to his farm that he had in Oklahoma. So he could actually commute if he wanted to. It was probably an hour or so drive from his farm to Tulsa, but he got a place, and when there was a chance, he would go back home. So it was somewhat uninterrupted for him, and it was a best case scenario. He never did get the big league managing job that he hoped he would, but he ultimately took a couple of pitching coach jobs because he realized that managing in the minor leagues is really tough because you don't get a lot of help. He had one player coach, he didn't have a pitching coach, and he had a trainer. And the trainer did everything that he didn't, such as arrange the flights or the bus rides, or bringing a player into Tulsa, or sending a player out from Tulsa, whether it was to the big leagues or down to the minor leagues. It was his job to do all those things. So people in the minor leagues back in the 60s wore a lot of different hats. And I just noticed today, earlier this week, that the Dodgers will travel with 9 different uniform personnel who aren't players. That includes trainers, coaches, camera people, and psychologists, just about everything you can name. Back in those days, we had a manager and a trainer and a player coach, and that was it.
So you did not take the call when you got drafted. Did you get the call when you were promoted?
Well, let's backtrack a little bit. I eventually talked to the Cardinals, and they invited, since I was under 18 at the time, they said, bring your parents down and we'll have a conversation. We did it after my 18th birthday, so I could have signed on my own, but my parents, myself, met in Stan Musial's office. It was the only year he was general manager of the Cardinals. So we met in his office and we talked money, we talked opportunity, and all these different things that the Cardinals would do, or any team would do, and what they tried to do. And they were honest about it. You know, a college education is an important thing. And we understand that we're competing against college, but what we're going to give you right here is an opening that you can't get in college because you'll be learning on the job. Plus, we'll give you money for a college scholarship based on what we're allowed to do. Back in those days, it was just a couple of thousand a semester. School didn't cost that much, but still a couple thousand per semester. It wasn't a whole lot, but it took care of everything that I needed to attend school, as I found out later. So I did sign because I thought that was the best opportunity for me. And well, as things turned out, 22-year career, and I have a chance to sit here and talk to you 30 years after I made my last start. So
this is the highlight of your career. This appearance on this podcast. You ever see the movie Moneyball?
I did see it.
What'd you think of it? When the whole signing Billy Beane thing, was that realistic to you?
It's hard to say because Billy Beane and the Oakland A's operate just a little bit different than what a lot of major league teams do. They were somewhat corporate, some of the teams that I dealt with. Others were a little more open. Oakland was a lot more open than a lot of other teams because they couldn't afford to spend money like some of the wealthier ball clubs. So they had to make do and be a bit more innovative in an effort to win pennants. And it seemed to work in the 70s because 3 times they went to the World Series and came home world champions a couple of those times. So Billy Beane was just a little bit different, and he evolved from the way things were done in the 70s and 80s with Oakland on a shoestring budget. And he made good because Oakland kept on winning and they were a powerhouse in the late 80s.
You know, you could have played on those Oakland A's teams because they allowed you to wear a mustache.
They encouraged you to do it.
Not the Cardinals.
Yeah, it was Charlie Finley that was considered an outcast. And every other major league owner, at least from my perception, viewed him as the enemy. But Charlie had a lot of great ideas. And if they had listened to him, well, baseball would be a lot different today. You know, Charlie came up with an idea when free agency was being discussed. He said, make every player a free agent every year, and we'll draft them. And if baseball immediately, because it was said, Charlie came up with this idea. They said, we're not going to do anything that Charlie says. Now, I remember being a player representative for about 10, maybe 12 years, and Marvin Miller talking about this in a meeting. They said if they had listened to Charlie, we wouldn't be here today looking for the advances in our players' agreement with the ownership that we have today, because Charlie was just that, just had that kind of thought process. So, you know, that's just the way, you know, things were done back in the era of Charlie Finley.
And I don't mean to fast forward, but one of the things that got you out of St. Louis was because you had a mustache.
Yeah, getting back to the mustache part, I got so off on a tangent, I forgot what we were talking about. Now, Charlie was interesting. He liked to get, he knew how to stir the clubhouse up. And he realized that if he got everybody in that clubhouse angry at him, they would take that anger out on the field and play better baseball. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. So Charlie, because one player, I think it was Raleigh Fingers or Reggie Jackson, decided to grow a mustache, that, you know, baseball was concerned about that. But Charlie took another turn with it and said, I'll tell you what, I'll give each of you, I don't know, $100, a couple $100 if you do grow a mustache, and we'll look like outlaws. I remember Ken Holtzman, another St. Louis left-handed pitcher who spent a great deal of time in the major leagues. He said, for a couple $100, I'll grow hair in my palms. So for Charlie Finley, he was always looking for a way to rile his players and to try to get people out to the ballpark. He did rile the players, but getting people out to the ballpark, that was a problem for him.
So if the Cardinals don't trade you and they don't trade Carlton, do you have another ring on your finger?
You know, that's hard to say. Getting back to the mustache thing, I decided to grow it. I had braces on my teeth during the 1971 season. And once those braces came off, I entertained the possibility of growing a mustache. I did. I liked it. And then I said, you know, let's keep it, because there was no rules. Nobody ever talked about it. Besides, the Cardinals had Dick Allen back in 1970. And you remember those big mutton chop sideburns? He grew them all the way down his ear, all the way up to the edge of his lip, and then contoured it and cut it in such a way that he had mutton chops on both sides. Now, but what's the difference between hair on your face with mutton chops and hair over your lip like a mustache? I didn't even give it a thought. Besides, it surprised me that Mr. Bush was so much against the mustache, because all of the pictures that I've seen of his father showed him wearing a big, bushy, tight mustache. For all I know, maybe he hated his father, and the mustache represented that. So I don't know what the deal was, why he was upset about it, why he demanded that I be traded. I actually, for years, thought it was just money. We were a few $1,000s apart. And, you know, back in those days, a few $1,000s went a long way, a lot different than what it is today. So he said what he wanted. He was angry about Carlton demanding more money. He was upset with Marvin Miller trying to get a players union and do things for players that nobody ever dreamed of before. So he fought it, and he took it out on trades of Carlton and myself. So what happens? Now we go into that alternate universe theory. You know, I have talked about this. I can't tell you how many times that I've discussed this. What would have happened? This is always the question. I got it when I came in to visit the Cardinals for their winter warm-ups. I've got it from different authors who have written books about the Cardinals, and they all want to know the same thing. If the Cardinals hadn't traded you, hadn't traded Carlton, and then if you want, you can throw in Mike Torres, Fred Norman, who had a couple of really great seasons with Cincinnati and won a few World Series with them. If they hadn't traded those guys, where would the Cardinals have ended up? Well, there's only three possible answers. The Cardinals and the players would have been either better off, roughly the same, or less than what they actually came out to be. And all of this depends on one step at a time. Every time you take a step forward, that changes something in your direction. So one little thing could have led to a great season by one of us, or somebody getting hurt and having a poor season. And who's to say that a better deal wouldn't have come along for Carlton, myself, or Mike Therese, Fred Norman, or anybody else. Mike Cuellar is another one they discussed. If a better deal hadn't come along that could have helped the Cardinals with a player that would have benefited them more than what the player was supposed to have done had he stayed with the team, what would the Cardinals' fortunes have been? It's an impossible question to answer. But a lot of people like to think about it, like to discuss it, because in St. Louis, that's what you do. You discuss all these different things, and you do it for years, you do it for decades, you do it for generations.
It's what makes us quaint.
Quaint is just part of it, but it's baseball conversation. It comes up whenever certain names are mentioned, and it always begins with a lead in of something like, if only they hadn't traded him. If only they had kept this guy. If only they had paid him his money. All of those different things, they're true. Who knows what would have happened? So the only answer that I can give anybody in St. Louis, you who are sitting there, and those of you who will eventually watch this, is who knows? Because there are so many different factors that would have to been considered to see exactly what the Cardinals' fortunes would have been.
Did you like pitching in the Astrodome?
Yeah, I did once I got used to it. Pitching inside takes a little bit of getting used to, because it's hard to believe that you're in a structure that is enclosed, that is that large. So it creates its own kind of atmosphere. It was always comfortable as far as temperature. The humidity varied, and I don't know why, because it was always hot and humid in Houston, particularly in the summertime, like it is anywhere else. But in the Astrodome, it had its own environment. The ball, according to hitters, didn't seem to carry as well. And it was a big ballpark to begin with, 375. It was one of those cookie cutter ballparks in terms of dimensions, 330 down the lines, 375 to the gap, and 400 to center field. But the ball just didn't seem to carry as well. And I was asked, was it a pitcher's park? And I've always answered, yeah, when I have my command of my pitches and I can throw them where they want. They're a real pitcher's park. They're a hitter's park when I don't.
You've got a book out that I have not had the opportunity to read, but I want to plug it a little bit. Hold
on 1 second. Hold on 1 second.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It just so happens that a copy of my book is on the desk where this is sitting. Let me bring it up like this. And you were about to say?
Bring in the right-hander.
There it is.
I've seen reviews. It's a very well-reviewed book. One of the quotes that I thought was great was your motto of work fast, change speeds, throw strikes.
Well, that wasn't my motto. I stole that from pitching coach with the Pirates, Ray Miller. Ray had T-shirts made up for his pitchers wherever he was a coach. And it was work fast, change speeds, throw strikes. That's a mantra. And if every pitcher listens to it, you got a pretty good chance of being successful. So with Ray, he talked about these things. It wasn't about velocity. It wasn't about spin rate. It was about location. And to me, pitching is still about location. All of those different things that are discussed today, as I mentioned, spin rate and all of those other things, those are all good. And had they been available when I played, I would have paid attention to them. But you can't take all of that out there on the field with you, because you have to somehow throw strikes. And that's the key to the game, and locating where those strikes are going to be. If you can do that, you got a pretty good chance of winning a ball game.
So from Houston, you have a successful stint in Pittsburgh. Then you have the opportunity to go to the Dodgers. Did I read this right? That part of the deal was, oh my goodness, hand behind your back, you can get traded to the Dodgers only if you guarantee a 5-year deal. Was that actually how that went down?
There was a time when the Dodgers were wanting to lock up the players that they had. They figured if they get a player in his mid-20s, no later than his mid-20s, then lock him up in a deal, because they saw the trend towards salaries and said these things are just going to leapfrog at a rate that's a lot faster than a lot of teams are going to be able to pay. So they said, what we'll offer players are guaranteed contracts, and we will pay them at a certain year's price. For instance, pay them at 1980 prices, because 1985, that same price for a player similar is going to be double, maybe even triple. So it may cost us a little bit on the front end, but on the back end, if this guy fits into our plans, then it's going to be cheap money toward the end of his contract. And if it doesn't work out for us, we can deal the player, because he does have a contract that's favorable to more budgets. So I thought it was pretty forward thinking, and it worked for me because I was in that mindset at that time, 10 years in the big leagues. And I knew that the average was 4 to 5 years as a big league pitcher. I had already doubled that. So I knew just how long I was going to be able to play, but I went beyond my expectations. So that long-term contract provided quite a bit of security, and it allowed me to focus more on my baseball acumen and improving myself than if I just had a series of one-year contracts.
And was your no-hitter with the Dodgers?
It was. June 27, 1980.
All right. Begs the question, what is more fun, throwing a no-hitter or singing on solid gold?
Well, definitely pitching a no-hitter. Singing on solid gold, well, if you want to call what anybody views on solid gold singing, that is a poor excuse for us. None of us could sing, and we knew that, but we kept our day jobs, and we knew that it was just going to be one of those things that was exciting for a couple of weeks, maybe a month or 6 weeks, and we got an appearance out of it, a couple of appearances on national TV, and then had some fun in the process. So we were rock stars for maybe a week.
Were you married at the time?
I was.
Oh, good for you. I was thinking this was like a chick move. This is like something you did to increase your cred.
Well, you know, it definitely could have done that, because I saw things out there performing on stage. You know, after we did it a couple of times, the movements and whatever, then I knew I had a pretty good idea what I was doing. So I had a chance to look at the room, and I said, you know, I can understand why guys could, or people, rock stars, could get addicted to this lifestyle, because the highs when you're out there performing, especially if you're good, you know what you're doing, that could be similar to what an athlete would experience on the field. There's kind of a parallel there as we both climb the mountain of success, athletes and performers.
How many times have you been married? 1 time, 2 times?
No, 3.
3 times? So
yeah.
I would imagine at some point in time, as you're in LA, LA's different than Pittsburgh. LA's different than Houston. Did you go into that not knowing what you were walking into, or what was it like when you got your feet in LA?
You know, I was more concerned about playing ball for the Dodgers. Remember the times, there were a lot of artificial turf stadiums, and I mentioned it earlier, they were referred to as cookie cutter stadiums. So the game was played in multi-purpose venues. Dodger Stadium wasn't one of those. Dodger Stadium was a real ballpark with a real history. And when you walked on the field at Dodger Stadium, you could, and it still happens to me today, you can feel the essence of those who came before me. Those like Walter Alston or Sandy Koufax or Don Drysdale, or any number of the great ball players that put on the Dodger uniform and performed well into the postseason. Up until last year, it took them 32 years before they finally got another world championship, but they did have a number of great performances over the 50 or so years that they had been open. And it was hallowed ground, much like Yankee Stadium, the old Yankee Stadium was in New York. When you walked in Yankee Stadium, you realized you were walking on that same grass, that same lawn that Hall of Famers from 100 years ago actually were. Well, maybe not 100 years ago because it opened in 1923 and I'm talking about 1980. So for some years ago, if you stood at the plate and batted, that was the same batter's box that Babe Ruth stood in. It was the same one that Lou Gehrig stood in. And in Dodger Stadium, it was the same mound, even though it's been mended and moved out and changed with the clay. It was in the same location that Sandy Koufax did. When I towed that corner of the rubber, that's where Sandy did. And then on the other side is where Drysdale did it. So there was history at every single turn. And that was important. It was especially important to me. And when I think about it now, 40 years later, I still get a tingle to say that I actually stood in that place and had a chance to perform in front of a crowd, a big crowd, just like they did.
And now when Kershaw throws, he says, this is where Jerry Rice threw pitches.
I don't know about that. I think what he's done is he's created his own path. And well, I guess we'll see exactly where and when it ends at the end of this year. His contract's up. So we'll see just what's going to happen with him. I don't know how long he wants to play. With what he's gone through, he's had back problems. He's in his mid-30s, and he realizes he's smart enough to realize that he's not going to be the same pitcher he was in his mid-20s. But he's smart enough to make adjustments. But he still has that urge to play and the desire to win that's second to none. So how long he wants to stay with that while his 3 kids are growing up, he has something that a lot of us would be envious of, and he has a choice in the matter. He's earned enough money in his career to do just about anything he wants and never really have to worry about it. So he owns 2 homes. He can make his home where he is now in Dallas, well, at least before he went to spring training, or in Los Angeles, and then chart a course for what he wants to do with the rest of his life without having to worry about it financially. It's a gift. He's earned it. And for me, I say congratulations on a job well done.
Well, he finally got his 1 ring. You've got yours in 1981. You showed me the book. You got the ring on?
No, I don't wear the ring. I keep that downstairs. I wear it when I go out. I don't wear it around the house because if I did, I'd have to take it off when I'm doing something because I don't want to scratch it or whatever. And then my memory not being what it once was, I'll leave it somewhere and it may sit there. So I keep it in one spot and I know exactly where to look for it.
In that series, you didn't have your best stuff in game 1. Game 5, and for people who don't remember, Rod Guidry was nails. I mean, he was not somebody who was going to give up more than 2 or 3 runs, even on his worst day. So you don't have the effort you want in game 1. You're coming into game 5. A complete game, by the way. What do you remember about that game now? What is it that you're most happy with that effort?
Well, in the World Series, we lost the first 2 games in New York. And we came back to Los Angeles knowing we had to win the next 3 in order to take a leg up on the Yankees. And we won each of those games by 1 run. Each game was exciting. Fernando, obviously tired from the full season that he put in, the number of innings that he threw, and then going every 4th day in the postseason, was showing signs that he was struggling, but he hung on to win the first game at home to make the series 2-1. The game on Saturday was, boy, what a game that was. The lead exchanged a number of different times, and ultimately the Dodgers won, evening up the series, which meant a showdown between both Guidry and myself, both pitching against each other in the first game of the series where the Yankees won. I gave up a run in the second, and the Yankees led 1-0 up until the 7th inning. And Guidry, from the second inning on, had retired 15 of 16 Dodger batters, 8 of them on strikeouts. So he is running at the top of his game, full speed. And suddenly he faces Pete Guerrero and hangs a slider. And Guerrero hits it for a home run. That tied the game. 5 pitches later, he tried to sneak a fastball past Steve Yeager. Yeager is a fastball hitter, and he hit the ball out of the park. So just like that, in the course of 5 pitches, the momentum of the game changed, and the momentum of the World Series changed. I held on. We won the game and went up 3-2 with the final 2 games, if needed, back in New York. Had a rain delay of 1 day, and we finally played the game on Wednesday. That gave everybody a chance to rest because we've been going at it pretty hard. And then we came out and meeting the Dodgers and broke up everything and won the game 9-2 to win the World Championship. What I remember on the way home was 3 weeks. We had a series of ups and downs, unlike anything that I had ever experienced. And I remember sitting on the plane, getting up after we'd been up maybe an hour. I couldn't fall asleep immediately because of the excitement. And I remember looking up and down the plane and seeing a couple of overhead lights on. Guys were trying to read, and I can see in some cases, they just closed their eyes trying to drink in everything that had just happened. And I didn't have to say a word to anybody as our eyes caught. We each knew that what we had done, and we finally achieved the ultimate as far as what a baseball player wants, and that is to win a World Series.
You know, I want to thank you very much for your time. I've got a few more questions. Every podcast, Jerry, that I do, I cheat a little bit. There's like 2 or 3 questions I know I'm going to ask. This is one I knew I was going to ask you.
Well, let me get a drink of water while you do it. I think I can listen and drink water at the same time. Hey, that's that Ritenour High School education coming through loud and clear.
1981, you won the World Series. 1985, you're back in the playoffs. You're playing in the Cardinals. You're up 2-0. They come back and they tie it up. Again, here's the question. You see your manager, not to be critical, but I'm dying to ask the question because I'm just curious. Are you in your head thinking, why are we pitching to Clark?
Yeah, because I'm standing out in the bullpen with Kenny Howell, a right-handed reliever, and we had the lineup card with us, and we can read it just like anybody else. And I remember before the first game of the series, Lasorda talking about pitching to Jack Clark and saying that he's the only home run threat. And against the Dodgers, historically, Clark, in a clutch situation, seemed to come through more than just about any other player. And so in this series, with runners on base and the game on the line, we're going to walk Jack Clark or at least pitch around him. In fact, he said it twice. He says, this is the only guy in the lineup that can do that against us. And I was surprised with those words still emblazoned on my mind that with the situation and Ritenour already facing him once, that Lasorda would order a walk to him. The next batter was Andy Van Slyke, a left-hander. And that was a situation where I would be called into the game to pitch to Van Slyke. But Whitey had Brian Harper on deck and a reserve catcher. And Harper would have pinch hit for Andy Van Slyke. The matchup would have been me against Harper, as opposed to Ritenour against Clark.
And then you might have another ring.
Maybe. Again, it's that alternate universe theory. If this hadn't happened, this would have happened. Well,
but then we couldn't go crazy, folks. Go crazy.
I remember Jack saying that. I saw that enough. And when I see that highlight, it comes up every so often online or on TV. And I look at it and I say, well, Lasorda had the first choice. I never second guessed him. I first guessed him because he said in the meeting, we're not going to pitch to him, but he decided to pitch to him. And everybody in the ballpark was wondering, why are you going to do this when you don't have to? But Tom had a hunch. But give him credit because he managed a lot of games by the seat of his pants and made a hunch. And more times than not, it worked out. This one particular time, well, it worked out better for Jack Clark and the Cardinals, and they went on to play in the World Series.
He just loved baseball. Unfortunately, you know, we've lost Lasorda, Tommy. And the one you talked about emblazoned in your memory kind of a story deal. I was covering the Cardinals, right? And Tommy was always naked in the locker room. It's like he never wore clothes.
You can't unsee that.
I'm telling you. Yeah. And the Dodgers had blown a lead in like a 3-game series, like second game or whatever. He comes storming out of the manager's office naked, rolls all the way across the buffet table and says, "You guys don't deserve to eat. See you tomorrow." Do you remember that at all? Or like those kind of things?
I think I've seen that done one or two times, and I can understand the frustration. And he did it for effect. He did a lot of things for effect. He liked to go and argue with umpires, not because he was right, but because it was for effect. If he did it at home, it was to get the crowd going. And he figured that if he could get the crowd going, then the players would respond in kind, and somehow it would ignite a rally. Maybe that's what he meant that particular night. Maybe the frustration just got over him, but he did it. He knew what he was doing. It was calculated. So it wasn't one of those spontaneous anger things. He figured that if he did something like that, then the team's fortunes would change. I don't remember if they did or if they didn't.
I got you.
But I do remember an occasion.
You played with a lot of great players. Steve Garvey, we've mentioned Valenzuela, just down the lineup, Bill Russell, Ron Save, tons of great players. You also played with Rick Monday. Did you ever ask him about the burning flag incident?
No, I never did. I never did. We never got around to it. He's been asked about that so many times that for me to bring it up, it would have been just like someone else asking him, another reporter. And to be honest with you, I didn't want to get a stock answer, and I didn't know if that was something he wanted to talk about. He had to talk about it. And I think even today, he likes to talk about it. And that's okay when it's done in a proper context. But we used to carpool to the ballpark, and there were a number of occasions to ask him just that. But for whatever reason, I never did. But we talked about a number of other things. So no, I never did talk to him about that.
So here's my personal Jerry is a nice guy story. You have a niece, Mary.
And I do. A niece?
Pardon?
A niece named Mary?
Mary Hellwig?
Cousin.
She worked with my best friend's dad. And so when the Dodgers would come into town, Mr. Dooley. And so when the Dodgers would come into town, you'd flip us some tickets. And I actually got to meet you twice, not in the locker room, but like in that vestibule kind of an area deal. And you would sign our balls and you'd be very nice to us. In fact, my friend, when I told him that we were going to be talking with you, he of course knows that he's the second biggest part of your career other than being on this podcast. But he said, you might remember the fact that you actually signed his same ball 3 times.
I did that.
That's what he says.
I don't know why I would do that.
Because he's an idiot.
My question would be, why did he give it to me 3 different times to sign?
Because it's cheap. I have no idea.
I thought you were going to tell me that there was an occasion and you asked me to sign something and I blew you off.
No, not to me. And again, I think it's because of the relationship with the you said niece or cousin. Yeah. So one of the things about your career, and we haven't talked enough about it, and we're going to run out of time. First of all, more than 200 wins. Longevity is not to be underrated, especially when you look at starters nowadays that pitch 130 innings. You were over 250 multiple times. And if you want to pick one stat, and I'm not a big stat guy, but Jerry, you got to 200 wins, second fastest in Major League history without winning 20 games. And to me, what that means is just I went out, I took the ball, I did the best I could, and I was good enough, long enough to accomplish what I accomplished.
It's a good way to put it. Good enough, long enough. There were some great moments and there were some not so great moments, but I couldn't put together enough great moments to win 20 games. It's one of those things. It happened. And when I don't think that much about it today because that's way into the past. Yeah. One thing I did find is that if you stick around long enough, a lot of asterisks are going to follow you. This is one of them. The other one, there's an asterisk of winning 2 games in one day in Wrigley Field back in 1982. That's another one. So you start putting all these things together. Another one that occurred to me, and I just found out about it, is that the total number of wins on artificial surface during the 1980s. Somebody threw that one at me. I had no idea about those things, but for me, I find it entertaining that fans could look at baseball in so many different ways to come up and ask questions that nobody else ever thought of. Who would ever think to say, which pitcher won the most games on AstroTurf back in the 1980s? Let's give a list. I would never guess that.
Talk about fans asking questions. I threw out I call them overtimers, the people that listen to the podcast, if they had any questions for you. And they had multiple. Here were the two most asked questions. Yep. One is lineups today and how they are constructed. Your thoughts?
I've heard, I don't know this for sure. I haven't been around a major league ball club since I broadcast radio games for the Dodgers back in 2008. And that may as well have been 2 lifetimes ago because things have changed that much. But what I understand in talking to other people that are around major league teams and how they work is that the lineups a lot of times are constructed by people in the front office the day of the game. They take all of the information and put it in and collate it in some way that they figure out the best way to defeat that team they're playing that night and the opposing pitcher and other pitchers on that team. So a lot of thought, a lot of effort go into making up these lineups. And there are a lot of managers that understand just that. They can't do it themselves, but they're given control of the game once it begins. And they have the option to make changes if they see fit or to make a last minute lineup change if they have to, because they know things on a level that the people who comprise these lineups during the course of a day won't get to know. So that is what I understand the way lineups are done, not only at the big league level, but a lot of times at the minor league level. So I don't know if it's good. I don't know if it's bad. I don't even know if it is. But if it is the case, it's just the way the game is run today.
Toughest lineup while a Dodger that you had to face, most votes were for the Giants.
Really?
Mm-hmm. McCovey
I thought the Big Red Machine of the 70s was one of the toughest. That and the Pirates of the early 70s. I thought that was a pretty good one too.
Well, while you were a Dodger, I think the question was.
I don't know. I never really looked at it that way because in the years, the early years that I was with the Dodgers from 80 to 85, I was pitching my best. And there was no lineup out there that I thought that could beat me. I just believed that. And then I went out there with that kind of attitude. And you can see from the numbers that more times than not, I was victorious. So during those years with the Dodgers, the toughest lineup, Cincinnati was still pretty tough. On a given night, there was any team, it didn't matter if they were at the bottom of the rung of the ladder, they could beat you. So there was no way of letting up. But the hardest lineup, no, I never really thought of it in those terms.
As we get ready to wrap it up, and again, for those people who like this episode, you can hear more with OTwithOliver wherever you get your podcast. We're going to do a quick St. Louis 7 with Jerry. I want to talk a little bit about the photography, but before we do that, I thought just some things deserve to end the way they end, and you got the pitch, and you got to walk off the mound the last time you were wearing a uniform.
That's right. That was on October 3rd, 1990. Jim Leyland, manager of the Pirates. And in 1990, we won the National League East Championship in St. Louis on a Sunday. The final game was scheduled for Wednesday. I told him I was retiring. And he asked me if I'd like to pitch the final game of the season. I said, absolutely. So I went out there, and in the top of the 6th, after getting 1 out, he came to take me out of the ball game. I didn't give him the ball. I told him instead, I said, I'd like to keep this ball. This is the last out I'll ever get. He says, I don't care about the baseball. I want to shake the hand of a man who pitched 22 years in the big leagues. Congratulations. So I walked off the mound to a standing ovation, and it was the only time in 22 years that I ever took a curtain call. I went back out there, looked around, and saw some 30,000 fans who came to that ball game. And it was just my way of saying thanks for not only all the great years in Pittsburgh, but all of the great years wherever I played. So it's quite a send-off, especially for a guy that wasn't Hall of Fame caliber. This is the kind of treatment that Hall of Fame ball players deserve. They've earned it. A lot of them just don't get it. But I was one of the fortunate few that got a chance to say when my career was over and walk off that field for the last time with my head held up high.
Very nice. So people want to find out more about the book. People want to find out more about Jerry.
We don't talk about the book unless we have
the book.
The book. You can get it at jerryroyce.com. I sign every one of them. I inscribe every one of them. I make the mailing label, and I'm the guy that puts it in the basket at the post office. It's bringing the right-hander. Something new, and I'll let you know right here. This will be the first announcement, is that it's coming out in paperback, according to the publisher, sometime this fall. So if you can't get it in a hardcover, you can probably pick it up in a paperback and just kind of zoom through it. It's a lot of good baseball stories from the 70s and 80s, from a kid who grew up in St. Louis in the 50s and the 60s and had the opportunity to live his baseball dream. It's all there, and it's available.
Like you just scribbled some stuff. Go ahead. I interrupted you.
No, it's all right there. It's available.
Jerry, like you just scribbled some stuff down. The book is
all of the instructions and how to get it, and I take care of these things usually within 24 hours.
All right. Tell me, what was the first stadium you took a photograph of?
You know, I have to think about that. Let's see. It might have been, I did it first in 1988. I didn't know if I was going to play. I couldn't find a team until just about this time, back in 1988, when the White Sox decided to take a shot. It worked for them because I won 13 games for a team that was 32 games under 500. So it worked well for both of us. I took my camera because I wanted to document what I thought could be the final year of my baseball career. So I carried a camera, and wherever we went, that's when I started taking pictures. I guess the first park that I shot was Comiskey Park. I got an absolutely perfect Midwest day. You don't get these too often. It was in early May, and I walked around the ballpark. The temperature, 75, 80 degrees, a slight breeze, hardly any humidity. And I got some of the great pictures of Comiskey Park, and I put them all on Flickr. So if you want to see what some of these ballparks look like back in the 80s, and I did it again in 1990, my final year, because it was in the National League this time. And I cataloged every place we visited. So there's pictures of a lot of ballparks that no longer exist. And when I post them on Facebook, I get a lot of sentimental recollections by fans who have followed me on Facebook and say they love these ballparks for a number of different reasons. It's where my grandpa, who passed away last year, used to take me. It's where I saw and met my wife or my husband. We used to sit in this section, and I remember this particular moment when we did that. So all of these things, it's a good thing for the people who see it and take the time to write about it and share it with other people. These are memories that people have of these ballparks. And like the people in St. Louis who remember Sportsman's Park or Busch Stadium 1, these are memories that last a lifetime.
I enjoyed our conversation. Did I forget to bring something up? Anything else?
No, I think we pretty well got it covered. So all I can say to everybody out there, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and please stay safe.